The grand chamber of the Tribunal of United Systems hummed with a tension thicker than the vacuum of space. Every eye, from the bulbous, multifaceted ones of the insectoid delegates to the coldly luminescent orbs of the Zill accusers, was fixed upon Admiral Jacob Vance. Human, war criminal, or desperate savior, the air crackled with unspoken judgments. Vance stood ramrod straight, his starched uniform a defiant splash of white amidst a sea of alien dignitaries. His weathered face, lined with a lifetime of command, was a mask of stoicism. Yet, in his eyes, a flicker of something else, weariness perhaps, or a chilling calculated resolve. The chief Zill prosecutor, its voice a series of clicks and chirps that the translator struggled to soften, began its opening statement. Admiral Vance stands accused of deploying outlawed neutron weapons on a scale unprecedented in galactic history. Cities, not armies, were his true target. Millions of our civilians perished, not in the heat of battle, but by a lingering, agonizing death. Images flashed across the tribunal screens. Once vibrant Zill cities reduced to gray husks, warped figures frozen in their final moments, and medical data detailing the gruesome effects of radiation poisoning. Vance did not flinch. In his mind, he saw different images. The smoking ruins of New Sydney, the desperate last stand on Proxima, faces of comrades twisted in horror, not by radiation, but by the Zill's relentless advance. He was no monster, he told himself. He was a shield, blackened and dented, but holding firm against the storm. Admiral, the tribunal moderator, a feathered avian creature, interrupted the damning evidence. The prosecution has laid out its case. Do you confess to these actions? Vance's voice rang out, clear and unapologetic. I confess. A ripple of shock swept the chamber. This was not the strategy they expected. Vance pressed on, ignoring the gasps and murmurs. But I do not confess to the crime of villainy, as the prosecution would paint it. I confess to the act of survival. The chief prosecutor whirled on him. Survival? You call a radiating entire planet survival? There were other options. Surrender. Negotiation. Surrender? Vance's voice took on a bitter edge. They came for extermination, not conquest. Did you miss the incinerated colonies? The slave convoys? Negotiation? They offered only subjugation. He paused, drawing a ragged breath. The neutron bombs. Yes, they were a gamble. A terrible one. They turned back the tide, but branded me a butcher. But I made a choice. His gaze swept across the tribunal, piercing each judgmental eye. Tell me, esteemed delegates, in my place, what choices would you have made? How many of your own people would you sacrifice before taking desperate measures? The silence in the great hall was deafening. Vance saw it then, the flicker of doubt in the eyes so recently blazing with righteous condemnation. The Zill prosecutor bristled, attempting to regain control, but the damage was done. Vance's defiance had infected the courtroom, shifting the narrative from mere guilt to the desperate complexities of war. The tribunal moderator finally broke the silence. Admiral, the tribunal acknowledges the gravity of your situation. However, this does not absolve. I do not seek absolution. Vance cut him off. Judgment, yes. Condemnation, perhaps. But above all, I demand understanding. Not for me, but for yourselves. The day may come when your precious alliances and lofty ideals face a darkness as implacable as the Zill. On that day, remember the choices I made. He turned and walked to the security detail awaiting him. His trial would drag on for weeks. Testimonies, political posturing, impassioned debates. Perhaps he would be imprisoned, perhaps executed. It hardly mattered anymore. As the massive chamber door sealed behind him, Admiral Jacob Vance knew he had already achieved his final victory. He'd forced the galaxy to confront the monstrous things done in the name of survival, leaving a legacy that would forever cast a shadow across the comforting illusion of interstellar peace. Days bled into weeks. The tribunal chamber became a battlefield of ideals. Zill survivors delivered harrowing testimonies, ghost-eyed children recounting the screams of their parents, medical experts producing horrific autopsy reports. Defense witnesses, somber human officers, painted a grim picture of early defeats, of unyielding brutality of the Zill advance, leaving the tribunal delegates visibly shaken. The insectoid representatives voiced quiet admiration for humanity's resilience. The herbivorous Quillen, staunch pacifists, described Vance's methods, yet their eyes reflected a newfound unease. Even the Zill delegation was forced to acknowledge the grudging respect their enemies had earned. Then came the strategic experts, alien analysts who had pored over the tactical data with chilling neutrality. Their verdict was clear. The neutron bombs had been a turning point. Without them, humanity would have been obliterated, opening the door for the Zill to potentially threaten other members of the system. For Vance, imprisoned but monitoring the proceedings with grim satisfaction, this was the key moment. He was not just a desperate monster. He was a flawed strategist who had saved countless lives, including indirectly those of his current judges. He noticed the chief prosecutor's arguments becoming less certain, the moral outrage tinged with a flicker of doubt. The other Zill, once so unified in their fury, now cast furtive glances at each other. This war, initially seen as a simple act of aggression against barbarians, was revealing a terrifying complexity. But Vance himself did not escape scathing criticism. A renowned philosopher of the reclusive elder race took the stand, her ancient voice trembling with barely contained disgust. Survival is not an excuse for such depravity. War may be inevitable, but it is how we wage war that defines us. Admiral Vance has poisoned the galaxy not only with radiation but with the notion that any act is justifiable in the pursuit of victory. Her words struck a chord. Many in the chamber shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The line Vance had so confidently drawn between necessity and atrocity now seemed frighteningly blurred. He'd forced them to confront the darkness within themselves, the potential for cruelty that lurked beneath the veneer of civilized discourse. The weight of the tribunal's gaze was nothing compared to the specters that haunted Vance's mind. They whispered in the quiet of his cell, demanding his attention. Sarah, eyes full of hope, a smile that lit up his soul. She'd stayed on Mars Colony, promising to wait. The transmission was barely a scream through the static. Zill bombardment, everybody gone, the whole damn colony wiped out. With Sarah died a part of him, the part that believed in gentle futures. Commander Hayes, grizzled and pragmatic, with scars older than Vance. The Zill, they're not butchers, son. You fight fire with fire or you're the kindling. He died on Proxima, buying time for the evacuation. His last transmission a garbled curse, but there was a hint of grim pride in it. Hayes' ghost was always present, a silent nod to every grim decision Vance made. And then there was the little girl. Earth was lost, humanity clinging to the outer colonies, fighting street to street, city to city. Vance, a then lieutenant, had found her huddled beneath a pile of rubble, her eyes blank with a horror no child should know. That day, something shifted inside of him. He'd sworn, not just to fight, but to win at any cost. If survival demanded that he, too, became a monster, then so be it. The neutron bombs were not a sudden decision, but the culmination of 100 small deaths of his soul. Every fallen comrade, every incinerated city chipped away at the man he once was. The Jacob Vance who stood before the tribunal was a weapon forged in the fires of desperation, brutally effective and irrevocably damaged. The trial might condemn his actions, but he knew they couldn't truly judge him. They hadn't walked in his boots, hadn't bled on his battlefields. His was the guilt of the survivor, the terrible burden of choices that damned him, yet saved his people. He closed his eyes, the harsh prison lighting giving way to the soft glow of a Martian sunset. The scent of rust and ozone faded, replaced by Sarah's perfume, a hint of jasmine and something vibrantly alive. Admiral, she'd tease, with that smile that could chase away the shadows of a long shift on the bridge. You look like the weight of the entire Starfleet is on your shoulders. His hand would find hers, rough and calloused, a stark contrast to her gentle touch. It's just a few supply route calculations, nothing to worry about. Lies, even then. The Zill advance was relentless, their appetite for conquest insatiable. Jacob, she'd insist, her eyes locking with his. Tell me. And he did. Shared the classified reports on the decimated outposts, the casualty figures that were more than just numbers to him. Sarah never shied away from the truth, her brow furrowing in concern, not fear. We'll find a way, she'd say with a fierce determination that always surprised him. We always do. Later, Under the vast Martian sky painted with two moons, their worries would seem distant. They'd talk of future beyond the war, building a home together, a garden overflowing with stubborn earth flowers on the red soil, a normal life, so precious, so impossibly fragile. He felt a different kind of darkness then, the kind carried in his own heart. The evacuation transports shimmered in the docking bay, engines whining in a desperate symphony. Proxima Station was on fire, not from a concentrated Zill attack, but from its own scuttling charges. "Get them on board!" Commander Hayes barked, his voice a rasp over the roaring alarms. "Every civilian, every piece of salvageable tech, strip this damn station bare!" "Sir," Vance protested, his own voice barely a squeak compared to the commander's. "The transports are overloaded already, we can't fit anymore, not without compromising the life support." Hayes fixed him with a stare as cold as the void. "Lieutenant, did those Academy lectures on casualty projections go in one ear and out the other? The Zill will be here in hours. Everyone we leave behind is one more warm body for their butcher ships." His pointed finger directed at a frantic family, trying to push through the security cordon. "You see that woman? The one clutching a child? Her husband's probably already a slag floating in orbit. You want to tell her there's no room? That her sacrifice means nothing?" The memory snapped back to the present, the images dissolving into the sterile walls of his cell. The transmission about Mars was a death knell, not a battle lost, but brutal annihilation. Sarah wasn't a casualty, she was a target. Proof of the Zill's merciless intention to erase every trace of humanity. With her death, something inside Vance snapped, not into madness, but into a terrible, focused clarity. He was no longer just a commander, but a shield. The damning verdicts, the chilling guilt, those were prices he was willing to pay to ensure there would never be another Sarah, another Mars. He noticed the chief prosecutor's arguments becoming less certain, the moral outrage tinged with a flicker of doubt. The other Zill, once so unified in their fury, now cast furtive glances at each other. This war, initially seen as a simple act of aggression against barbarians, was revealing a terrifying complexity. The elder spoke up again, her voice gaining intensity despite its frailty. "Do not be deceived by this strategic victory. The seeds of true monstrosity have been sown. What horrors will you embrace next, when faced with an even more implacable foe? Admiral Vance is not the worst of you, but a chilling sign of what you are all capable of becoming." Silence hung heavy in the chamber. Then, surprisingly, it was a Zill representative who broke it. "The elder speaks the truth," he rasped, the words grating against the translator's softened tones. "Admiral Vance, he fought us with our own ruthlessness. This war was about survival, yes, but if victory transforms us into the very thing we despise, what have we truly won?" A quiet murmur swept through the assembly. Even some of the human delegates looked disturbed. Vance knew that his actions, his very existence, had fractured the unified front that had previously condemned him. Now, the galaxy was not only afraid of Zill, but also of itself. The tribunal moderator, struggling to maintain order, called for a recess. As Vance was escorted back to his cell, he could no longer take satisfaction in the strategic victory. The elder philosopher's words echoed in his mind. If his desperate choices had bought humanity a future, what kind of future would it be? One built on a shaky foundation, comprised of ideals, fear, and the lingering taint of the neutron bomb's deadly radiation? The gilded antechamber usually buzzed with polite, diplomatic chatter, an undercurrent to the formal proceedings. Now, it was thick with unspoken tension. A cluster of insectoid delegates, usually models of calm efficiency, clicked their mandibles in agitation, their antennae twitching in a storm of frantic signals.
"Recklessness,"
one hissed.
"He has emboldened them. Should the Zill decide upon a preemptive strike against us all, the blood will be on Admiral Vance's hands."
Blood and radiation. A Quillen delegate, his usually gentle eyes showered with fear, interjected. "The neutron weapons, they violate the very spirit of these accords."
"Accords?"
A reptilian being, delegate of a notoriously pragmatic species, scoffed.
"Noble words, easily abandoned when your own extinction looms. Perhaps this human admiral has shown us a necessary truth."
His cold gaze swept over the gathered representatives.
"Or would you have preferred the Zill at your doorstep?" "Never!"
The Quillen protested, his voice high-pitched and strained.
"There are always better ways. Diplomacy, sanctions, even strategic surrender if necessary. Anything is preferable to..."
His voice trailed off, unable to utter the word atrocity. A lone avian representative, her feathers puffed up in agitation, broke in.
And what of deception? The Zil offered peace talks, and while we debated, they slaughtered entire colonies. Perhaps a dose of harsh reality is exactly what our deluded alliances needed.
The chamber erupted in a cacophony of conflicting arguments. The insectoid clicked in a frantic warning, fearing such a display of disunity would be detected by the ever-present Zil delegation. Yet, the dam had broken. The Zil themselves observed from a distance, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with a strange light. Was it satisfaction at the chaos they'd sown? Or perhaps a flicker of apprehension, seeing their enemies embrace the ruthless tactics that had made the Zil so feared? The tribunal moderator, desperately attempting to regain control, was drowned out by the increasingly acrimonious debate. Vance's trial was no longer about one man's crimes. It had ignited a galaxy-wide identity crisis. Were the champions of high ideals destined to be trampled underfoot? Or were they merely predators in a hostile universe, their lofty principles a dangerous, self-destructive delusion? News of the disintegrating unity within the tribunal filtered into Vance's isolation. He found a twisted amusement in it. Their outrage had been predictable, their arguments idealistic, but ideals, he knew all too well, were the first casualties of war. It was as if his own battles were being played out on a galactic stage. The insectoids, with their focus on future consequences, echoed his younger self, the one who recoiled from the neutron bombs. The Quillen, with their unwavering pacifism, were a painful reminder of Sarah and her belief in a better way. And the reptilian delegate, with his cold pragmatism, was a chilling echo of Commander Hayes' grim philosophy. The tribunal, in its attempt to judge him, was now judging itself. His cell wasn't just a prison, it was a mirror, reflecting the galaxy's own struggle with survival, with the fine line between heroism and monstrousness. Yet there was no satisfaction in this. It wasn't the vindication he secretly yearned for. Instead, a chilling thought crept into his mind. What if the elder race philosopher was right? Perhaps he had become the catalyst for a terrible shift. After all, hadn't the reptilian delegate made a chillingly valid point? If the Zil attacked again, could the tribunal truly stand united in its condemnation of necessary sacrifices? He slumped against the cold wall, the weight of his choices pressing down harder than ever. He thought of the young lieutenant he used to be, the one who believed in honor, in clean victories. That man was gone, consumed by the fires of war. He'd won, in a sense, but what was left of him to savor this victory? The question echoed unanswered in the empty cell. He had forced the galaxy to confront harsh truths, but in doing so, had he pushed them towards a bleak future, one where survival stripped of any morality was the only guiding principle? It was a future in which he was both a victor and a villain, forever haunting the galaxy he'd saved. As the tribunal descended further into disarray, Vance felt a strange, disturbing shift within himself. Initially, the Zil had been the absolute enemy, faceless, brutal, the antithesis of everything humanity stood for. Now, he wasn't so sure. The arguments echoing from the Grand Chamber had sparked a terrible realization. Hadn't the Zil been forced to make their own monstrous calculations? Their relentless expansion, the annihilation of entire colonies, perhaps to them, it was a warped form of survival, a desperate bid to outpace the other threats lurking in the vastness of space. He remembered a chilling passage from a captured Zil transmission, a commander addressing his troops. Our enemies call us butchers, but what is a butcher? One who ensures there's food on the table, even if the methods are unpalatable to weaker stomachs. The words had then fueled his righteous fury. Now, they sounded eerily familiar, a distorted reflection of his own justifications. Monitoring the Zil delegation, he noticed a subtle change in their demeanor. The initial arrogance had given way to a watchful calculation. In the fracturing of the tribunal, they saw a potential advantage. But there was something else, too. A flicker in their multifaceted eyes. Something akin to grudging respect. For the first time, Vance felt an uncomfortable kinship with his sworn enemies. He understood their ruthlessness, the cold logic that prioritized the survival of their species over abstract morality. It sickened him. And yet, a chilling truth remained. He had played their game and beaten them at it. Haunted by this revelation, he returned to his memories. Sarah's gentle smile, the stubborn earth flowers she dreamed of planting on Mars. These were the ideals he'd fought for. But to protect them, he'd become something very different, mirroring the very enemy he sought to destroy. Did the Zil also have their own Sarahs, lost to wars fought in the name of a twisted sense of survival? Were they too monsters forged in the fires of desperation? The questions hung unanswered in the sterile silence of his cell, a testament to the twisted reality this war had wrought. Days of heated debate devolved into acrimonious deadlock. The insectoids buzzed with thinly veiled threats of withdrawal from the Alliance, their belief in unified defense shattered. The Quillen, voices trembling with despair, called for a return to diplomacy, despite the Zil's clear disdain for negotiations. Smaller member species, previously swayed by arguments of survival, now huddled together in fear. Were the cracks in the tribunal an invitation for the Zil to strike again? Or worse, would the taste of ruthlessness the humans had demonstrated infect the entire alliance? Would they all abandon their principles and turn on each other in the name of preemptive strikes? The Zil delegation fueled the chaos with calculated ambiguity. Their pronouncements were less accusatory, subtly shifting towards reminders of the dangers of disunity. Some tribunal members openly questioned whether humanity should be punished, not only for their war crimes, but for revealing the terrifying fragility of their precious peace. Amidst the chaos, the avian delegate, long an admirer of humanity's tenacity, made an impassioned plea. "Admiral Vance saved us," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Yes, with abhorrent means, but are we going to sacrifice him, the architect of our survival, to placate our own guilty consciences? Will you truly stand united against the Zil when you see the consequences of condemning the very tactics that might once again save us?" Her words further divided the chamber. Practical species swayed, casting furtive glances at the Zil delegation, as if their silent presence was an ever-present threat. Yet, the weight of the neutron bombs lay heavy on the Alliance. They had looked into the abyss of their own potential for cruelty, and it had shaken them to the core. The tribunal moderator, voice hoarse from futile attempts at order, called for a final vote. However, there was no sense of unified resolution. This verdict would not be a testament to galactic justice, but a declaration of the tribunal's own descent into a desperate, fear-fueled pragmatism. The galaxy Vance had saved now seemed poised to condemn him, not truly for his crimes, but forcing them to confront the darkness within themselves. The scent of ozone was sharp in the Academy simulation chamber. Cadet Jacob Vance took a steadying breath, trying to ignore the nervous pounding of his heart. Final combat assessment. His whole future hung on this moment. His team had been ambushed, a ruthless exercise to test adaptability under pressure. The Zil aggressors, simulated with chilling realism, were closing in. "Options!" he barked to his squad mates. "Tactical retreat? Regroup?" one ventured, sweat beading on his brow. "They'll cut us down," another cadet countered, fear tightening her voice. "Distraction, then flank attack." Vance's words had an edge of desperation. There were acceptable casualties within simulation parameters, but too many deaths meant failure, a death knell for his dreams of command. Suddenly, the answer hit him. A risky gamble. He pictured the map layout, the choke point, and a brutal certainty settled in his gut. "Squadron," he began, not quite recognizing the grim determination in his own voice. "I need a volunteer." That night, as the medsim tank hissed closer over his simulated wounds, Vance stared at the ceiling of his quarters. He'd passed, narrowly, one simulated death instead of several. His strategic mind understood the cold logic, but as the ghostly pains of his calculated sacrifice lingered, he felt the sliver of something precious die within himself. This was the price of victory, of survival. But even in that sterile, programmed environment, he tasted the bitter metallic tang of the real thing. The clean victories he'd once envisioned now seemed tarnished, forever marked by the sacrifices he'd been forced to make. Back in the cell, now a grizzled admiral awaiting a verdict of a far more devastating magnitude, Vance realized what truly haunted him. It wasn't the deaths of his fallen comrades, nor the lingering radiation of the neutron bomb. It was the cold realization that the idealistic cadet in the simulation chamber was more dead than any of the casualties left on the battlefield. Days bled into an eternity of waiting. Vance, a specter in his prison cell, had given up tracking the chaotic tremors shaking the tribunal. The verdict was less about him now, and more about the fragile galactic community itself. When the moment finally arrived, he was summoned back into the Grand Chamber. The alien delegates, once radiating righteous fury, now seemed a collection of frightened, desperate creatures draped in the finery of their respective species. Even the Zil delegation exuded a subdued tension, masking their grim satisfaction with a veneer of impassivity. The verdict was read, a convoluted testament to the tribunal's own turmoil. Guilty of war crimes? Yes. but with a recommendation for leniency citing the extraordinary circumstances he'd faced. Exile was the sentence, a compromise that satisfied no one. Vance almost laughed. They condemned brutality while embracing its grim necessity. He was both scapegoat and savior, a chilling warning hoisted upon a tarnished pedestal of reluctant respect. As the guards escorted him away, his gaze swept over the assembly. They averted their eyes as if the sight of him would infect them with the brutal necessities he embodied. Yet he saw it. The faint flicker of Commander Hayes' grim approval reflected back at him. He'd ignited a fire in this alliance, a fire fueled by fear and desperation. Whether it would eventually consume them, or forge a new kind of unity based on harsh realities, remained to be seen. One thing was certain, the galaxy would never be the same. As the massive chamber doors sealed behind him, Admiral Jacob Vance, broken war hero and unwitting architect for a darker future, carried a chilling satisfaction along with the weight of his exile. He understood now. His true sentence wasn't banishment, but the knowledge that in the next war, in the next desperate fight for survival, they would all become him.